Sarah Ferguson is a woman of striking contradictions. A figure who moves between luxury resorts and carefully pocketed hotel soaps. Who has rubbed shoulders with kings and queens, yet spent decades drowning in debt. And right now, she doesn't even have a permanent home to return to. She's been quietly cut off from the royal circle that once defined her life, left to navigate an uncertain future from hotel suites and borrowed addresses halfway across the world. So how does someone with such deep royal roots end up living out of a suitcase in the Middle East? And more importantly, what exactly led her there? To understand where she is today, you have to go back. Not just a few years, but decades. Because the story of Sarah Ferguson is not a story with a single turning point. It's a long, winding road of extraordinary highs and very public lows. And the further you follow it, the stranger it gets. Royal commentators have spent years trying to make sense of her trajectory, and most of them will tell you the same thing. There is no one quite like her. And there may never be again. From the moment she married Prince Andrew in 1986, Sarah entered one of the most scrutinized institutions on the planet. The public loved her energy, her warmth, her refusal to fit neatly into the polished royal mold. But behind the celebrations, a more complicated picture was already beginning to take shape. Stories about spending habits, household bills, and financial pressures began surfacing early in her royal life. And once those stories started, they never really stopped. For years, she occupied a strange space in the public imagination, glamorous enough to attract cameras, controversial enough to keep them watching. One moment she's attending exclusive events at some of the world's most prestigious venues. The next, there are reports of mounting debts, failed business ventures, and very public money troubles. But here's where the story takes a turn that almost nobody expected. Some of the most striking details aren't about the extravagance at all. Behind the scenes, biographers and former associates have painted a picture of someone almost obsessively careful about small, everyday costs. Stories have circulated for years about household habits, carefully saved hotel amenities, and a fierce attention to minor expenses, even while larger financial pressures quietly piled up around her. Imagine staying at some of the most exclusive resorts in the world and still keeping every complimentary soap, every tiny free item, treating each small saving as though it genuinely mattered. It sounds almost impossible to reconcile. And yet, that contradiction may be the key to understanding her entirely. Royal watchers have long noted that this kind of financial tension, intense focus on small costs while struggling with much larger long-term problems, isn't simply unusual. It's a pattern. And for Sarah, that pattern has followed her like a shadow for the better part of 4 decades. Debt mounted quietly in the background while the lifestyle continued in the foreground. Business ventures came and went. Some generated headlines for the right reasons. Others did not. And through it all, she kept moving, resilient, some would say. Trapped in a cycle, others would argue. But here's the part that keeps royal commentators talking, because it's not just about the money. There's another layer to this story, one that involves the people closest to her and the institution that once welcomed her in. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, Sarah's daughters, have spent years carefully building their own lives. They've established careers, raised families, and work hard to create identities that stand apart from the controversies swirling around their parents. Most observers genuinely admire them for it. But every time a new headline breaks about Sarah, or about Andrew, those carefully constructed reputations get pulled back into a conversation they never asked to be part of. And according to some commentators, that burden has become one of the most quietly painful elements of this entire story. What they've had to carry because of their parents' choices, that's a chapter that rarely gets told in full. Then came the business that changed everything and brought a whole new level of scrutiny crashing down. A company called Gate Ventures. According to public reporting, the company eventually entered liquidation, triggering a wave of legal and financial examination that is still playing out today. Sarah had served as an executive director during part of its operations. As liquidators began combing through financial records, questions emerged around loans, transactions, the movement of funds, and what documentation existed to explain them. Legal proceedings were set in motion to understand exactly what happened, and why. And what they began uncovering only deepened the public fascination surrounding her story. It's important to be clear here, legal scrutiny alone does not establish wrongdoing. Liquidation reviews exist precisely to examine the facts, resolve disputes, and let evidence determine what conclusions can actually be supported. But for a public figure already carrying decades of financial controversy, even the appearance of fresh legal questions is enough to reignite every old headline, every past debt, Every failed venture, every unflattering story that had ever been written suddenly felt relevant again. And for Sarah, that meant the conversation about her finances, a conversation she has been trying to manage and reshape for years, was suddenly louder than ever. Which brings us to her current situation, and it is a strange one by any measure. She is no longer based in the United Kingdom. Reports have placed her in the United Arab Emirates, a move that royal commentators have described in strikingly blunt terms. When you relocate to the Middle East under these circumstances, they say, it reads less like a lifestyle choice and more like a strategic retreat. She's reportedly been scouting for a new PR team, signaling a clear desire to eventually return to the British public stage. But what exactly she plans to return with, and whether the public appetite for a comeback even exists, remains one of the more open questions surrounding her right now. Some commentators believe a tell-all book deal could be on the horizon. Sarah has written books before, and she has never been shy about sharing her perspective on the events of her life. But this time, the speculation carries a different kind of weight. Because she knows things. Years at the very center of palace life, a front-row seat to decisions and dynamics that most people will never see, and according to some observers, very little left to lose. That combination, they argue, makes her one of the more unpredictable figures in the entire royal landscape right now. And that's exactly what makes certain people inside the institution deeply nervous. Meanwhile, the monarchy itself is watching all of this unfold with considerable care. Prince William, widely described by commentators as laser-focused on modernization, transparency, and the long-term public trust in the institution, is unlikely to view ongoing financial and legal questions involving extended family members as anything other than a reputational risk. The tension between protecting family and protecting the crown has never been more visible, or more consequential. And stories involving Sarah have a way of forcing that tension right back into the open, no matter how many times the palace would prefer they stayed buried. King Charles, for his part, is often portrayed as someone who favors quiet stability over confrontation. But stability is difficult to maintain when new headlines keep arriving. And the headlines surrounding Sarah Ferguson have shown no sign of slowing down. For royal analysts, the question is not whether these stories will continue, it's how the institution chooses to respond to them when they do. Because that response, or the absence of one, sends its own very clear message. And then, just as the speculation about her future reached a fever pitch, something unexpected happened. Sarah vanished from public view almost entirely. For months, there were barely any appearances, no meaningful statements, almost no trace of her in the places where she would normally surface. Rumors spread quickly, the way they always do when someone at the center of so many stories suddenly goes quiet. Was it health? Legal pressure? A deliberate strategy? Nobody seemed to know for certain. And that uncertainty only made people more curious. What came next surprised almost everyone. She had retreated to an exclusive wellness clinic nestled in the Austrian Alps. Luxurious, private, and entirely removed from the relentless noise of public life. For supporters, it was an entirely understandable response to an enormous amount of personal pressure, a chance to breathe, recover, and find some quiet space to think. For critics, it raised immediate and uncomfortable questions. In the middle of serious financial scrutiny, with legal reviews ongoing and questions about debt and business conduct dominating the headlines, how does a stay at one of Europe's most exclusive health retreats fit the picture? That question spread fast. And it didn't go away quietly. Because that tension, between the life she has always lived and the financial reality that continues to chase her, is always the part that people find impossible to look away from. It's not just curiosity about one person's choices. It's something deeper. It's the fascination that comes from watching someone exist in two completely different worlds at the same time, and somehow keep moving forward despite the weight of both. Biographers and former staff have spent years trying to describe what life around Sarah actually looked like up close. The accounts that have emerged over time paint a picture of a household shaped by very specific routines, strong personal preferences, and exacting standards around daily life. Room preparation, wardrobe care, personal comforts, all of it managed with a level of precision and expectation that, according to some accounts, left a strong impression on the people who worked alongside her. Supporters argue that many of these stories have been distorted or taken out of context over time. Critics point to them as evidence of a lifestyle that consistently outpaced the financial reality underpinning it. The truth, as is so often the case, likely sits somewhere in between. What is harder to dismiss is the sheer volume of financial difficulty that has accumulated over the years. Reports of debts stretching into the millions. business setbacks that eroded both money and reputation, property transactions that didn't go as planned, legal proceedings that refused to resolve quietly. Each individual story might be explainable on its own, but taken together, across 4 decades of public life, they form a narrative that is genuinely difficult to reframe, no matter how skilled your PR team, and no matter how far from London you happen to be living at the moment. And yet, she is still here, still generating headlines, still fascinating people who have followed this story for years and find themselves unable to stop. There is something undeniably compelling about that kind of persistence. Whether you see it as resilience or recklessness probably says more about you than it does about her. But either way, the audience hasn't left. Royal watchers around the world are still paying attention, still waiting to see what comes next, still wondering whether this is finally the chapter where everything changes, or just another loop in a cycle that has been turning for a very long time. Because that's always been the heart of the Sarah Ferguson story. Not any single decision, not any one controversy, but the relentless, enduring contradiction at the center of it all. A life lived at the highest levels of privilege, marked by some of the most public financial failures in modern royal history. A woman who carefully saves the soap from hotel bathrooms but somehow finds herself recovering at a luxury alpine clinic when the world gets too loud. A royal insider who has been pushed to the edges of the institution but still knows exactly where all the doors are, and exactly what's behind them. After everything, the debt, the scandals, the business collapses, the exile, the silence, and now the slow signals of a possible return, the question everyone is really asking is the same one it's always been. Can she find a way back? And if she does manage to rebuild once more, will it actually hold this time? Or will the weight of everything that came before eventually prove too much to carry? Royal watchers aren't looking away. If anything, they're leaning in closer than ever. And if the history of Sarah Ferguson has taught us anything at all, it's this: just when you think the story is over, it finds a way to surprise you all over again.